Hello, welcome back to youHQ Wellbeing Wins webinar. It's me, Jez, the Engagement Director of youHQ, and I'm really pleased to be joined by Sam Eustace, Product Manager at CPOMS. If you don't know who CPOMS are, where have you been? CPOMS are the market-leading safeguarding, pastoral and wellbeing platform working in so many schools all over the world. Sam, how are you doing?
All right, thank you, Jez. That was a solid and no pressure introduction whatsoever.
CPOMS are a big. I mean, CPOMS have become such a big part of the work that we do at youHQ, which we'll come on to. But Sam, I'd love to hear. I think people would love to hear. We always start a bit more about you and your background and how you found yourself being product manager at CPOMS.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to talk about it. It's been an interesting journey. I didn't start in product management. I've been a product manager for a year, a few months, maybe over in CPOMS now. And honestly, before that, I didn't know product managers existed as a role. I wasn't really aware of what product did. Before this, I worked in schools across Leeds and West Yorkshire, starting out my life as a kind of, travelling behaviour support worker, doing behaviour consultation across South Leeds, working with schools to manage more challenging children in their settings. That was about 10, 12 years ago. And then the role really evolved from there, moving into different areas of that work, into specialising in kind of adverse childhood experiences and early years trauma, and then working with people like the Thrive approach and other areas like that to kind of really get to understand child development and emotional growth of a young person and how the brain develops, and trying to apply that. So I've spent a long time in a 3-form entry primary as an emotional health and wellbeing leader, so member of SLT, member of the safeguarding team, doing the work kind of mostly through lockdown, to be honest, working with families to kind of get through the COVID period in one piece, making sure they had everything they needed, and I guess really challenging the role as much as possible in those circumstances to try and help support the families that were in most need, and then transition from that into being a DSL of a special educational needs setting in Leeds. So we did that for a number of years, where we're working with multiple sites across a 3 to 19-year-old age range in SEN, doing the safeguarding work. And then it was kind of personal circumstances, children, things like that came along, and an opportunity that knocked to become a product manager of CPOMS. I've always used CPOMS. If I haven't been in a school that had them, I've tended to have the school move to CPOMS eventually, because I found it to be the best solution for us at the time in every setting I've been in. So it kind of made absolute sense to move from supporting individuals in schools to supporting everyone who's potentially here today, and up to over 19,000 schools now use CPOMS, and non-education settings. So it feels like a real privilege to be developing the products now and the roadmap for that journey of CPOMS, and hopefully affecting the lives still of many, many young people, families, and school workers, educationalists across the UK and beyond. So, yeah.
I find that really interesting, coming from a former PE teacher, director of sport that is now working in tech as well, and doing. I like hearing you say that you were working on the ground, obviously in some very challenging settings, and working with students, by the sounds of it, that had a very high level of need, but using CPOMS as a product, as a customer. How does that opportunity then arise? I'm really interested, and I'm sure there'll be other people out there interested to know, if you're happy to share, how that opportunity arose, where you go from DSL working in SEN settings to actually then being offered a product manager role, where, like you said at the start, you didn't even almost know what a product manager was. And I feel similar. My job title is engagement director. People say to me, what's an engagement director? And sometimes I still sort of go, I don't know, really. I was a PE teacher for 16 years, and now I'm doing this.
Yeah, do you know what? It was a very strange, I guess, just a random opportunity that occurred. And I know it feels like one of those silly things to say. It did just happen. It wasn't something I was looking for. We, in the role I was in at the time, we were doing a lot of leadership and management training, and we were working with a colleague called Karen Amos, who people who are been on a couple of webinars this week will have known. She was doing some work with us in CPOMS just the other day, doing a webinar on managing difficult conversations in safeguarding. And as part of that work, we were asked to join LinkedIn to network with other people who'd done the course, and ultimately just through LinkedIn, I was approached by a recruiter that, with my background, CPOMS were interested in interviewing me for the position of product manager. So swiftly after Googling what products is and what product managers are and trying to come up with some sort of rationale for why it made sense, it kind of got excited about the idea of it being kind of that next natural progression I never really wanted to move out of safeguarding unless it was for a specific purpose. So I think to move out and still be involved in safeguarding and affecting change, it made absolute sense at that time. And no regrets so far. I think it's been a really interesting move. And I think one of the things that you were discussing there, the interest in having the background that both of us have, I think it's paramount in the work that we're doing. The work that CPOMS are doing for the product and the different product ranges, and some of the work that we'll talk about later that we're bringing out, but also the work that youHQ are doing. It's to have that lived experience working with young people in schools, in settings, in non-educational establishments, to work with the staff that are in those settings and to be able to understand and, I guess, imagine into the world of that staff member properly, like what that day-to-day is like. That's how you make good products, and that's how you make the connections last with the settings that you want to work with. We're not about a sale and done. We want to build relationships with the people that are using our products, and we want them to feel connected into that family, and that to know that we care. Even when we have the hard times, we want to make sure people understand that we're aware of the difficulties that they're going through and that we understand it. And you do that by getting people like ourselves, and I guess who've got the experience. And because there'll be many people out there in education now listening who are like, unless you've been in it, you don't know. It's one of those little clubs that you join that once you've been involved, once you've been on that first day of September and that last day leading up to the holidays and done those calls and had those late nights and had that Ofsted visit, it's a difficult thing to communicate with other people and know that they really understand it. So I'm hoping that just by having more people like myself and more people with backgrounds like yourself in these positions, it helps people feel a bit more connected to the world of product and what it's all about.
I think that's so interesting, and it also just shows that, like you said, you don't have to be technically advanced in product or I mean, I don't whether you've got a tech background, Sam. I don't know whether you do, but really,
I was the guy that was asked to fix some stuff in the office. I can do a bit, but no, nothing. My degree is psychology. My hobbies and interests are in kind of cooking and music, and my day-to-day life consists of not that much in IT. But if you've got a willingness to learn, one of the discussion points I think you were trying to make is, is there people out there who might want to make that leap? And if you've got a willingness to learn, and you're fortunate enough, like I was, to have an employer who was willing to take that chance, and what they valued most was your experience, not your qualifications in products, then actually the world of what kind of we're doing, engagement director, product manager, they're very similar. We take what we learn from the users and we try and translate it into something that our engineering development teams understand, and we essentially try and make the right judgments and the right features that make sense to help everyone who's listening now, make their jobs easier. That's all we're in it for. We want the best products out there that support safeguarding and make people's lives easier to do the jobs that they do, because time is a commodity that you can't create for people. If what we release saves you an extra 5 minutes in a day that you can spend with a young person in a classroom, then our job's done. We'll be happy with that. So always on the lookout for new ideas, always look out for new kind of integrations and support and ways that we can develop the product. And, I still get that itch, which is why I do these things like webinars and stuff. No one's actually said I'm good at them. They're letting me entertain myself with the sound of my own voice. I enjoyed being with users. I enjoyed being with people. And that was probably the hardest bit of moving to this role, was the kind of the virtual element of it. But other than that,
can I ask you how you cope with that, Sam, the virtual element? Because that's something that I'm happy to say I found quite difficult. I feel very privileged to be in a position where I'm running a company with friends, and like you said at the start, I think the other thing is the impact. Obviously, CPOMS are having a huge impact. You said 19,000 schools. It's incredible. we're starting to feel, we're nowhere near that, but we're starting to feel like we're growing and we're having more of an impact and working in schools across the world. How do you manage that change from working in schools face to face, day to day with people, and then being fairly virtual, like you said?
Yeah, it's tough. Like the hardest part of my day is still bouncing between meetings, finding, and to that end, being a DSL and being a product manager is the same thing. The role is to work with the different areas of the industry, of the organization, to try and come to kind of an agreement with the direction of the products and what you want to do and how you want to develop it. And there's hard conversations in that. There's things that we can't do. And ultimately, I do all that without any power and control over anyone in the organization. I'm not a line manager of anyone. So it's a lot about relationships, which is why I think, the DSL type of stuff and the safeguarding work that people do, and, teachers in general, people, educators, people in schools, that's what we do well, those soft skills, relationships, supporting people, helping people come into, their own conclusions about ideas, supporting them when the conversations are difficult. So I try and get around people as much as possible, go out to events, go out to spaces, go see users in settings if I can, invite them into the setting where I can. People are welcome at our office anytime if they'd rather do that instead of a virtual call about issues, I'd happily take a meeting in person. And then I guess my colleagues would probably say that on the days that I do go into the office, so try and go at least once a week into the different offices, that I set aside time to pester people, whether it's about work or not. Just, an hour of my day I would try and put alongside just to be around, seeing the different teams, spending time with them, trying to have a bit of a laugh and a joke sometimes, trying to take the edge off some of the more difficult periods of the day. And then that kind of helps me reset. I'm my regulation system runs on relationships a lot of the time. So I think being connected is important. Luckily, I've got a fantastic team around me in CPOMS, and hopefully a lot of people who've made contact with us over the time for whether it's support or advice or giving us features of take away the same thing that, the team are great. A really great set of personalities that, you're happy to even connect with virtually, because you feel like you're part of it. And the atmosphere at CPOMS itself is something that I was really kind of proud to be a part of. It reminded me of schools I've worked in the past where there's a real kind of team spirit. And the title of this, Wellbeing Wins, I think that's one of the things that we'll probably talk about a bit later, is the importance of that staff wellbeing in an organisation. Really, the work that we do isn't as connected as it is as people out there in schools with the young people that are managing kind of adversity, but we do take phone calls every day about situations that have come up, and how people are feeling, and maybe even when we've got it wrong, how that's impacting their world at their side. So looking after each other is really important, and however we do that, whether it's the culture that our management team create, or whether it's just the little conversations or the little jokes that you can have over Teams with people, can get you through. Trying to just be what I was in school, but just in a virtual space, and in times like this, just not moving quite as much so that the camera can see you.
Is that is the key for you, and is the reason why you think you got into safeguarding and you continue to work in safeguarding in a big way, your passion for connecting with people, relationship building? Because that's, for me, that's maybe not the first thing I think of when I think of DSLs and safeguarding. I think as a former teacher, and I think there's probably other teachers out there, the word often scares you, doesn't it? And you think, oh, I don't want to get it wrong and I'm going to miss something. But do you feel like that's one of the most important bits, is the connection with people?
Well, safeguarding itself, if you're not involved in it at all, can be a truly terrifying concept. And I think half the battle, as people will well know in all the schools I've worked in, is you want to do so much with the children, the families, with the staff, and ultimately there is a line that's drawn with funding, resources, and the ability and time. So you're always leaning on people, on organisations, on family members, on other people in the school to kind of help you through. There's always far more work than the time you have in the day. There's always a million different things to prioritise. So a lot of that how else, I couldn't think of another way that I could regulate in that role. So I think being drawn to feeling connected to people, being a DSL gave me 1,000,000 times a day to interact with different people. Working in safeguarding, working with young people in general, I went into it because I enjoy those interactions. I think, when you're good at it, when it goes well, there's a real kind of, I guess, neurochemical buzz that comes from that can be very addictive. That idea of supporting people and getting a good result is great. It comes with its lows as well when it doesn't go well, which you have to kind of look after yourself and manage. And, everyone's got their own kind of ways of doing that. But nothing beats the high of success in safeguarding for me. It doesn't always come as often as you'd like, but when it does, it's a phenomenal feeling, and it's something that you can really celebrate as a school that you've done well, or as an organisation that you've made a difference. And I can't think of another reason to. I guess I can't think of another role I could be doing that would give me that, and I think that's why moving into kind of CPOMS made sense, because I still get that sense of achievement and like I'm supporting people, even if it's vicariously from a distance. That our system's doing its job that it needs to, and it's got that, we're that one piece of the puzzle. I think that made sense, Jez.
Yeah, it does, and that's really cool, and your passion for it has really come through, I think, which is lovely. I wanted to ask Sam, like, where have you seen, what's been the biggest advances in safeguarding and the changes, and from a product point of view, that you've had to change and adapt CPOMS because of a changing landscape? Is it post-COVID? Have you seen big changes post-COVID? Is it keeping up with different frameworks, the KISI framework, for example? Where have you seen the biggest changes over the last 5 to 10 years, maybe?
I guess, CPOMS is much bigger than me. I've been a year and a half or whatever. It started many, many years ago with some fantastic people who created it from nothing and grew it to what it is today. And the acquisition from Raptor more recently is helping us advance and grow further. But it's over that journey. Obviously, we've been around as long as, well, if not longer than, like, keeping children safe in education. We've been around as long as the DBS system. So if you imagine just the impact of that, oh, my office light has gone out. Hang on. There we go. Sorry about that. If you imagine the impact of that change on safeguarding, on the frameworks, on the policies, on the way people view safeguarding, just from those things coming into play, and then the development of keeping children safe all the way through the years, that we've really fine-tuned safeguarding in the UK. And I still, I've been lucky enough to experience safeguarding conversations in different countries and talking about it from different areas. And I think I still see the UK being at the forefront of safeguarding and early intervention and support. And it's something that we can really be proud of. The keeping children safe policy, as much as a DSL you've grown every summer, they make a big change because it's more work for you. That's all those changes are kind of at the forefront of safeguarding, and it's doing it for all the right reasons. But as you can imagine, as a software company that kind of banks itself as being the best to manage some of these issues that are going on in schools, we have to be adaptable. We're lucky that we're a fully customizable system, so a lot of the time we can roll with the punches. Some of the bigger things that come up are always a challenge, like when attendance codings change and things like that. We have to keep abreast of it, but we've got a really slick team and a really supportive team that kind of help out push those changes as quick as we can. Thinking about the policy procedures, like COVID was tough for schools, no doubt. You could do a whole webinar on the impacts, the effects, and the aftermath of COVID on young people, families, and kind of family nucleus and everything else, and the emotional regulation of young people and all that stuff. But from a product perspective, for a lot of schools, we were the saving grace. We had that opportunity. We could go virtual. We could go we were in the cloud, so we had that ability to be portable. So we became a linchpin for some schools to be that connection between kids at home and school, and having those connections with staff who were out and about, being able to record it in the right places. But the policy and procedure itself post-COVID, that you can see now that focuses more on mental health, and the discussions that we're having around, even at this point where, CPOMS is opening its doors to more and more integrators, and, one of the things I was super excited about with youHQ is that idea of really incorporating the student voice into things, which has become more and more prevalent as a kind of the first thing that we need to get right in any investigation or support that we're putting in. But then, the added guidance and policies and the revisions to those, working together to safeguard children, for example, and other policies like that just, until you break it down and you're in the role, it feels daunting and overwhelming to have that many policies and procedures that you need to align to and follow. And I was really grateful in Leeds to have the education safeguarding team in my local authority who did a great job of helping you break that down into bite-sized chunks, support you with training, and help you work through those revisions and those latest updates and those last-minute changes. But from a school perspective, we do our best every day to keep up with what they have to deal with. We're a solution. We're a tool in the toolbox for those educationalists and those people in non-education settings, sports clubs, charities, whoever takes us on. We want people to take us on and know that they can rely on us and trust us, and we've got their back. And that's just an area of the system that they don't have to worry about, and they can focus on the young people and the kids.
Do you see that being a key differentiator for CPOM's success, Sam? The fact that you are a total partner, and like you said, you're almost, when you work with CPOMS, you've got the schools or the organisations back in terms of updates to the framework and making sure that everyone knows exactly what's going on. I think I always remember coming back into school after the summer holidays, and one of the first things that was shoved under our noses was the Keeping Children Safe in Education framework. And I did always have that moment of, God, I've got to make sure. And it was kind of rammed down our throats a bit. You've got to read this properly, and you've got to sign a document to say you have read this properly so you understand it. And it's just that element, like we said, we've already said it on this call, haven't we? You just don't want to be that member of staff that misses something or that gets something wrong in a really important moment. Yeah. Is that a big part of it? Do you think that you're that real partner, that support to the school and the organisation?
I think the organisation has done an incredible job of helping the schools that we work with feel valued and supported. And we don't take it for granted, the work that we do. Just this week, we've internally had a presentation from Paul Stewart from Safeguarding Fundamentals, discussed his journey as a youth in grassroots football, being a victim of abuse. Talked us through it and really just reminded the organisation about why we do what we do. And I could stop anyone in the corridor in the office and ask them why they're here, and they'd be able to tell us that they're doing it for the reasons that we've laid out already. That we want to be that solution for the young people, not because it's a piece of software, not because we're a company, but because we all. You can see that if anyone who gets down to the office will be able to see that in an instant with the people they meet. We've got a number of people who've worked in education in various different ways, worked with young people in various different ways, reach out into their communities in other ways, and are from that kind of area that we are. So it's kind of ingrained in us at CPOMS that ultimately there is, at the end of every decision we're making, at the end of every call we take, there's a young person, a family, or a person who works with them affected by the decision we take. That wasn't meant to sound like song lyrics, but that was an odd one. But yeah, it's in it every day. So I think we don't take that for granted, and I think we do it well. We're adaptable, we're supportive, we provide a whole package, and we get to do brilliant things like this, like integrations with youHQ, where we're not just creating a data silo of information, we're actually gathering stuff together to create a kind of holistic discussion around that young person, around that family. And ultimately as a solution, we make people's jobs easier. And like I said before, time is not something we can give people back easily. So if we save time here, there and everywhere and it adds up, then great. Hopefully they finish slightly nearer to their finish time of the day than they could have done. No doubt they'll still work over and above the hours that they're meant to do, but we offer that solution, and we keep trying to innovate it as much as possible, and we keep listening to users and supporting them with new features and new kind of steps forward in the in the ed tech safeguarding software industry. So while we keep doing that, I'm confident we'll stay ahead of the pack. We've got a lot of interesting things coming up that will hopefully keep people interested and connected with us and help them to understand that we're still doing stuff for them. But we're really kind of open to questions and comments and criticisms. We're not going to develop without hearing the good and the bad. So when we have our customer advisory meetings, when we have support calls with customers, or when we even, whenever I take kind of discovery calls with customers, we're open to everything, and we're thick-skinned. So kind of take it on the chin as, if you're saying we've got work to do, then we've got to do it. Let's work it out. So I think all that kind of comes together into a world where schools ultimately see us as the best solution, and fingers crossed we'll continue to.
I'd love to come back to how you take on the feedback. You've just touched on it a little bit in a bit. Can we just, because the title of the webinar is Voices in Vigilance, Wellbeing Data and Safeguarding in Schools. Can we go to that for a sec? Because CPOMS specifically has wellbeing as part of the kind of the key tagline now. It's a wellbeing, safeguarding and pastoral platform. Where do you see the importance of this sort of integration that we have, where we can leverage pupil voice and survey response and that kind of stuff? Beg your pardon. Sorry about that.
That's fine.
So where do you see the importance in the pupil voice side of it, Sam, and the ability to collect that on a regular basis and how that links in?
I guess there's a couple of points to that. One is, pupil voice, understanding what pupil voice is about. I think for me, it's one of the most powerful things you can do. It gives us the rhyme, reason, the understanding of what it's all about when we're dealing with those issues and those concerns that arise. Students, children, young people, however you refer to them in your organisation, should feel part of the solution, part of the support, part of the processes that are going, that are kind of happening in front of them. And I can't think of anything worse than a child who's in a situation where maybe they feel powerless or out of control, to then have the people who are there helping them, making them feel like that as well. So, student voice is so important to just understand, touch base, figure out what's actually going on, because we put a lot of our own prejudged notions, our own thoughts, our own feelings, our own kind of schemas on the world into these situations if we're not careful. And that's, where we ultimately need to ensure that we have good safeguarding supervision, that we're a good reflective practitioner, that we're professionally curious, but we're not overstepping the line. And I think in terms of, being more direct about the integration between CPOMS and youHQ, I think ultimately we can't be narcissistic enough to think that we're the only person that a kid's going to speak to. And that's tough. Like, I will be honest, when I reflect on my practice over the years of DSL, there are times where, because you put on that pedestal as the person with all the answers, or you're the go-to, and even the leadership teams are coming to you for the final say of what to do, even though you're not really in charge, but you are, and it feels all odd. If you don't check yourself, it can draw you into this really narcissistic kind of world where you feel like you're like the center of it, and the world can't go on without you, and I won't take a day off and I won't call in sick because it'll crumble. And unless you reflect on the work that you're doing, you can start thinking, that's when you start making decisions in isolation, or you start applying what you think is best as to being the solution, rather than, and in those situations you can skip the voice of the child. And I've done that in the past. I think, reflecting on that with supervisors and stuff, we're not all grade A perfect DSLs all the time. We are at the mercy of our own personalities sometimes. And like I said before, when you've been fed all those kind of good neurochemicals all the time, when things are going well, the dopamine, serotonin hits are coming in because cases are coming out and people are saying you're really good at your job, it's difficult not to get carried away with that sometimes, and allow that to lead you sometimes. So I think having a good team around you and checking in on that's important, but also having a consistent approach to how you get pupil voice in there to try and ground you every time in what you're trying to do and achieve is really important. I think that's what youHQ does well. You know, having those things come in, having those mood alerts come in, and having those responses come in where you've got, before you even dig into it too far, you've got the voice of the child to start with. There's a foundation for that. And ultimately, you pull in that investigation and that support and that case or whatever it is that you're going to do, you're pulling that away from being a you-centric model because you're starting with the kid. And, you know, I might be alone in some of these thoughts. You know, there might be people out there going, oh my God, it sounds like a terrible. But I do feel like for the most part, I did a good job. I think there's times where we look back and we go, man, I could have done that better. But, you know, it's that voice that you guys provide is kind of next level. It's effortless. That's the real important thing as well when we talk about integrations with us. We try and make it as easy as possible. So yes, you've got the two systems. Yes, you can analyze, deep dive into the youHQ world or into the CPOMS world, but actually a really kind of supportive part of the integration is that you're on the chronology of the young person, you're reading everything else that's going on for them, and you're seeing the youHQ input as well. So you're not going to miss kind of elements of that discussion. You've got that whole voice, that whole child approach to safeguarding, that kind of holistic view, which we're all kind of after. And it provides context that you otherwise would not get sometimes. And as I said previously, we can't be narcissistic enough to think that we're the person they'll speak to. You know, as I said, I did a lot of reflection over the years in my roles, and people find it odd sometimes as a DSL when they tell you something and you say, all right, go find out some more, then go ask these questions of the kid. So why isn't that your job? Well, you've got the better relationship. You know, ultimately this is about, if the child has chosen you to explore with you their feelings, their thoughts with them, let's not break that up and let's not jar that. Let's explore it further, be more inquisitive, be more, you know, be there for that young person. And, you know, being a mentor or a shadow on the side of that person to help them, I guess, support that young person best is sometimes the right way, rather than being the person who kind of goes into the phone booth, dons their Superman outfit and runs down the corridor and saying, I'll fix this. So I think from
Sam, how adequate is the training of the teacher that works with the DSL? The conversations we have a lot with DSLs, especially with the integration, is super positive. They all totally agree with you. In fact, I don't think I've met a DSL that hasn't said that's not a great idea, that you leverage people voice in some way, and using youHQ is a great way to do it, and integration is really great. But the flip of that is the class teacher, form tutor in a secondary school that says, well, I'm already overloaded. I'm teaching a full timetable. I've got marking, and now I've potentially got low mood alerts coming through. And do I know whether or not that's a safeguarding concern? Where's the threshold? So I suppose the question is, do you think the training is good enough for the teacher that works with the DSL? And do you feel like the system is set up in a good way for us to be able to track and monitor wellbeing data that links in with the safeguarding platform like CPOMS?
I think there's a lot to be said around how people architect their systems when things like these are coming in. You know, no one wants to be responsible for overwhelming and overworking already overwhelmed and overworked people. And you know, I think we touched on it a little bit earlier in conversation. You know, staff wellbeing is super important. You know, put your own oxygen mask on before you help other people. It's kind of the well-used turn of phrase, and that's really important in an education setting, and non-education setting, sports club, charity, wherever you are. Anyone that's in a high-pressure environment where, you know, you're dealing with emotional things and you've got a lot going on, we have to look after ourselves. And, you know, with great power comes great responsibility. I'll just throw in a load of quotes to try and answer this question, Jez.
Spider-Man.
Yeah, exactly. If you are gonna adopt something like an integration from something, you have to be aware of the amount of additional work that it will create, and that's, I think, where good auditing and monitoring comes in. And we have, when you integrate with CPOMS, like through the youHQ integration, the youHQ integration has its own kind of persona in the system. So you can audit the work that's coming in from that, and you can make sure that people aren't overloaded. When we discussed it, the low mood alerts in themselves, they could come in thick and fast. But what we're saying is it's student voice. And if even in the most highly worked situations, if a kid walked up to you in the front of the desk and said, I'm super low mood, I feel awful, I feel depressed. In that moment, I would hope that none of them would turn that young person away if they wanted to connect and talk. And what we're doing with the integration, what you guys are doing at youHQ, is just giving an extension of that pupil to share their voice. I don't think we should be dismissing the results that come through on it because it's application based and it's not from the child's mouth. So if we can reframe people's thinking as to what that alert means, not that it's a bothersome piece of technology that's pinged me again, but actually by that coming in, that's the voice of a child, but done vicariously through this application. But at the other side of this, at the beginning of this story, before this alert got to me, some kid pressed a button that made sense to them at that time that they felt that way. And if we can start removing and distancing ourselves from the technology that's the intermediary and just visualize that young person saying it to us in front of us, how would you deal with them now? Then that's how we should be dealing with them if it comes through in the technology as well.
That's so good. You actually blew me away a bit there because, it was described to me on a call recently as a gift. And I found that really interesting because, and I'm being, this is kind of the problem. And we're faced with fantastic ideas around well-being and safeguarding, which we all know are super important, and everything you said is vital. But I think we also are faced with a system at the moment where there are a number of teachers that are finding the job very difficult. I was one of them for 16 years. My wife works at a SEND school locally, and I think the landscape has changed. But I really love what you just said about how we can reframe pupil voice as not extra work and not burden, but opportunities to develop really fantastic relationships that kids are going to remember their whole lives. And that's what they remember. They're always going to remember the teacher that stops and listens and takes time.
The other question is, what are we doing not just on the teaching side, but what's the child's expectation of when they fill that in? What's the student's expectation that will happen? Or, what part of themselves are they giving to that application to reach out? Because, yes, there are occasions on any pupil interaction survey where a kid, I used to do the My Health, My School survey a lot in primaries, and some of the responses were comical that kids would put into some of the questions if they were just laughing with their mates and filling it in. So yes, you will get some false positives. But for every false positive, that's just another case that you've not had to go all the way down the line of social care and everything else. And that's a good thing from a DSL's perspective. If I'd rather do 30 false positives in a week than one real safeguarding issue where a child is under stress or abuse or, dealing with adversity. So I think from a child's voice perspective, what is it that they're, at any point when that comes through, they could have given a tiny amount of themselves when that question popped up and answered it, or it could have been the hardest decision in the world for them to click that button in that moment. And by clicking that button, they will have laid out a set of expectations potentially in that moment of what would happen, or that's their window to share what's going on in their world. I discussed earlier the training that we had yesterday, and one of the things that Paul was saying in his recount of his years of abuse was he felt powerless to tell people. And at points when people were half noticing that something was there, even when the abuser was present, he was willing them to notice and willing them to say something. And, in that moment, when a young person is dealing with alerts or surveys or questionnaires or whatever it is, we don't know how much of themselves they're giving to that moment to press that button. That could be the hardest thing they've done to submit that survey. So it's not okay for us to just dismiss it as a piece of work that's a problem for us. We've all got windows of tolerance that are wide or narrow, depending on the day that we're in and what we're dealing with, and that speaks volumes to us about kind of how we look after our staff in schools and what avenues to explore their own well-being we give them. But I don't think young people should suffer because we're stressed and that we're frustrated, or be dismissed, their concerns be dismissed because of our own situation at the time. So it's important that we kind of look after each other in this. And if there are people who are feeling that they're in a position where this is just another piece of work or it's another problem, then it's our duty to kind of do the work with the DSL and the teams to try and change hearts and minds about why that, if you do a good educational piece at the beginning as to why you're buying a youHQ and why you're integrating it into CPOMS, then it should be welcomed, because there's nothing bad about it. It's, you're doing it to support the roles of everyone in there and to understand the young people more and to build better relationships. So if people aren't getting it, then it's about figuring out a way to support them to understand it in a better way, and maybe making contacts with people in the organisation like yourselves and stuff about how we can better support people to understand what this solution's all about. So
No, it's good, really good. You've got me really thinking as well, really thinking about, again, your product manager. I'm not product manager, but I'm often in our product and thinking about the user experience, and that's so powerful what you said. Students that aren't just, yes, sometimes I think you go to the negative side and you might think, oh, you might just click through a survey, but what you said about, you don't know how much the student is giving to themselves with that one reach out for support of a click of a button, or if they type a message into a member of staff, or they're clicking on a low mood emoji and giving a reason for that feeling. That idea, like you said, that they're giving a lot of themselves to that moment, that's really powerful, and I think that's really important to hold on to. If there are staff listening to this, whatever their role is, who have worries about safeguarding, about making mistakes or getting it wrong, what have you got any top tips? So whether it might be a new member of staff that's come in that does get concerned and worried about keeping up to date with safeguarding, is there anything that you can say to support them?
I guess I always found comfort in finding the people in my organisation who kind of I got on well with, I worked well with, and were kind of on my wavelength when it came to understanding safeguarding, what I was going through. They had a similar sense of humour or whatever, and like I say, I regulated well through relationships. So if I found myself struggling, I found people and I spent time with people, not necessarily to discuss the struggles, but just to be with them and feel better from that kind of oxytocin that's released when you're having that back and forth and that good feeling. But in terms of understanding it more, I think a lot of the fear of safeguarding is demystified through training. Understanding that actually safeguarding encapsulates such a huge world. And we talk about the difference between safeguarding and child protection a lot in kind of induction trainings and stuff. But if we were to go generic with safeguarding and suggest that we're covering all bases for the sake of argument, then it can feel like an overwhelming amount of information. Like keeping children safe, when it did its few years back, when it did that superhuman update and there was loads more pages, scared everyone, I think, for a moment. And then they're only going to add pages to it as we grow and we have a more complex need for safeguarding kind of policy out there. So if you get good training, it can be broken down well and it can help it to be understood in manageable chunks. But for the majority of people in an educational setting that I've worked with over the years, I've needed nothing more of them than to just build good relationships with the young people around them, and the rest will follow. Build your relationship, get a crib sheet from your DSL about how to interact with a young person who you think is about to make a disclosure, like what you can say, what you can't say, how to do it, where to go. Get that kind of drilled into your second nature. And then if you understand the basic principles of what that conversation should be like, then don't allow your own self-doubt and fear to kind of disrupt the flow. Because you can come see me as a DSL afterwards and we'll unpick it and we'll talk about it and we'll figure it out. But in that moment, the only thing that matters is you and that young person. And when we overthink it, yes, there's a huge complexity to safeguarding, that it could be this, it could be that, it could be this. But in that moment when a young person is going to tell you something, or you've got suspicions about something, all you've got is what you've got in that moment. And with a good safeguarding team around you, they'll help you deal with everything else if you're not the one who's safeguarding trained. And ultimately, that's their job then. The people who've had the training, it's their job to take it onward and run with it. You're thinking about like American football terms. You're down in the line, you flick that ball up to the quarterback, but it's up to them then to take it and pass it and make that shot and do what they need with it. And all you're doing is passing that initial ball. There's no one's asking anything else of you. You don't have to run with it, do anything with it, or you're not responsible for the touchdown. It's the people trained in your organisation who do that. But you just look after yourself and your step in that, and understand those signs. Take interest and listen, because that's tough. When you've got a million things on and someone like myself is drilling into you about like prevent duty or something, and you're in a position where you're thinking this doesn't apply to my class, you're not always listening to those signs and those indicators that we're trying to get across to you. And 10 minutes of listening could change the way you perceive a situation in a month's time. So, we don't like people like myself. Love training. I love training people. I love interacting with people. I don't like being the person who's stopping you doing other things that you need to do because I'm doing mandatory training. And sometimes the mandatory training isn't fun. I can't make it exciting. I can't make it super interesting other than we need to get through it and we need to talk about it and it needs to be tough and it's hard graft. So I think, just be respectful and listen and see away from each thing that you do, and knowledge will build up over time, and you'll feel more comfortable. But otherwise, just ask any questions that you've got there. What's the old teacher thing? There's no stupid questions. There's probably 10 other people with the same question, and that's true every time. I'm still questioning stuff now. I'm not by no means an expert in the field. I'm learning stuff every day. That's what we're about. That's what it's all about.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sam. I think we got some questions that came in. So I think Sophie, there you go. Look, she's right on it. So thank you for this question. With the integration between youHQ and CPOMS, is there a way to set the system so that only certain reasons for a low mood alert are migrated across to CPOMS? So just to give that context for anyone that doesn't know, or is it the case that every low mood alert goes across? And that's from Melissa. Thank you, Melissa. So the way our integration works, if a student logs onto youHQ and the school is also using CPOMS and they've set it all up so it integrates across, if a student uses the mood emoji survey and says they're feeling really low, they get an opportunity to pick a reason for that. So we're finding increasingly things like sleep are becoming a real issue, or students at least are saying that they are feeling low because of poor sleep.
Right.
But I suppose the question there is there a way of setting up the integration so that only certain reasons are pulled through into CPOMS? So it might be, for example, a school decides that sleep is not a safeguarding concern for feeling low, but there might be another reason, like if a student picks mental health or picks physical health or picks another reason. What are your thoughts on that, Sam?
Listen, what I have learned from people in the development world is that anything is possible. It just takes X amount of time or X amount of resources to get there. Developing the integration from youHQ side to send a more defined set of parameters through to us would not be a difficult role. We could explore it with customers. My only concern would be, I guess, from a safeguarding perspective, who do you want to decide what's important to you at that time? Using the example of sleep, and for 90% of the students in a setting, sleep may not be a low mood alert that you're interested in, and it may not be a safeguarding concern for those 90%, but there could be one kid where them saying that they've got a low mood alert for sleep is links with a bunch of other things that are going on for that young person, and actually it forms part of the wider complex of nature of the case, and it's something that you need as part of that student voice to try and support. I've worked in cases where even just simple things like you maybe run an early help plan and the kid's bedtime routine is a bit of a mess, and the family just can't quite understand the necessity for an earlier bedtime routine, and then a kid says on youHQ that sleep's an issue. it gives you that little bit more student voice to support those discussions about how to instill a better bedtime routine. And that's a potentially a low-level example, but it feels to me like that triage should be done more so in the school. If it's becoming an overwhelming amount of alerts, then of course there needs to be conversations. But the other thing to consider, what we spoke about 5 minutes ago, was how much has that young person invested in that alert, and what does that young person expect to happen? Because if they're expecting contact when a low mood alert is pressed, then if I want to get in front of you, Jez, as a student, and I want to tell you things that are going on at home, but my 1 to 5 rating doesn't really encapsulate what I'm feeling, or I just daren't press the actual thing that's going on for me, I'm just going to press anything that's going to give me a 1 that may instill a conversation with you where I'll tell you something down the line later. So, it may go in as a 1 and sleep, but it may be a 1 and I'm self-harming. And that may only come out in the communication that you have with that young person that was triggered by the 1 that seemed arbitrary at the time. So I would totally agree as a solution provider that I wasn't making that decision.
I agree, Sam, and our data is overwhelmingly saying sleep is the main cause of low mood. But I agree with you. I think that sleep is a way in, is a good, fairly safe, impersonal way in to say I'm not okay. And it might be true, but like you said, it links to so many other things because we don't sleep well when
explore what disrupts sleep and what causes sleeping issues and what causes sleeping problems, because not sleeping is usually a byproduct of other things. There's usually something going on, whether it's issues with the bedtime routine, whether it's issues with relationships, emotions, feelings of stress, anxiety, feeling unsupported, being in an abusive relationship, in an abusive home. There's usually something that's going on that is a precursor to the sleep being a problem. Even in the strangest of circumstances, you can usually get to the bottom somewhere. And, it could be as simple as, I'm using my phone too close to the time I'm going to sleep. Therefore, I'm being a bit too impacted by the blue light and I can't sleep then for 2 hours or whatever. I'm on my Xbox or my PlayStation. And it doesn't have to be particularly sinister, but sleep isn't always necessarily it's not the trigger often for the mood. It's usually a byproduct of something else that's going on when the sleep's disrupted. So even the unassuming can lead to some pretty challenging discussions and conversations down the line.
Sam, can I link to that question and feedback, which I talked about earlier on? We haven't got that long left, but I'm intrigued how you as product manager, what's your process for taking on customer feedback, identifying what is amazing idea or what's just one-offs or might not work, and communicate that with the rest of the team? And you've got 30 seconds to tell me the answer.
The process is always evolving. We love getting out and about to events. Myself or other people in the organisation, customer success, professional services, sales, whoever it is out and about, will always take on ideas and features. They'll pass it on. Obviously, with a base of over 1.5 million users, it's pretty difficult to discern from one person whether that's a good idea or not. So we can't always take everything forward. But we have a lot of people who are internal users they use the products day to day. They have grown up with it in the time that they've worked at CPOMS, obviously, and they've been here a long time, but also been in schools as well. So we would do some internal testing out of ideas periodically. We will go out to kind of working groups and contact customers and opportunistically grab customers if they've kind of emailed in with a feature idea. Would maybe grab a few of them together. Sometimes we're running like focus groups and stuff. We've got our customer advisory board, which we run ideas by. So at that point, the prioritization is, there's an element of the work which is that discovery work with customers, and then there's the other element which is, I guess, the reason they brought people like myself in with the experience on the ground, that sometimes you have to kind of trust your gut sometimes, and know from your own frustrations and colleagues' frustrations over the years that this bit needs fixing, or this bit needs an added bit of work, or that this will be take the premium cases and forms that we just released. That was a brand new piece of work that kind of is a next step up for safeguarding in CPOMS in terms of information management. allowing people to escalate issues to cases and create case types and build custom forms in the solution, which it just couldn't do before. And that was a lot of development work and a big punt, but I think will be a massive kind of bonus to a lot of people in terms of how they manage information and kind of action their school policies through the CPOMS software. And you guys will feature heavily on it because escalations of incidents may come from student voice, from youHQ integration, where you are the basis of a case because a kid has said X, Y, and Z through your program. But you can only do so much research in a user base of our size before sometimes you just have to take a punt. And sometimes, if it doesn't work, you learn a lot from what doesn't work as much as you do what does. Luckily, we've got a really kind of chatty bunch and a huge set of internal users as well as external that are willing to give feedback. So the process is always evolving and it's a fun one, but it does give you the odd sleepless night when you've invested a fair bit of time in a development that you're not sure how it's going to drop. So yeah, otherwise email support, take them. If you're ringing about an issue and you've also got some ideas, feel free to let them know. And we've got an internal process for passing that over to product, and the more ideas of the same nature we get, we'll pull them together and usually that's kind of how the prioritization occurs. If 10 users ask for this and only one's asked for that, then we assume that the 10 is speaking for the majority, and we kind of go with that way.
Sam, thank you so much for your time.
No
it's been, I've really enjoyed that. It's been, I've got one more
great.
question. One more question that's come in, part of the press. In relation to confidentiality of data, is it the case that CPOMS reads data from youHQ, but youHQ cannot read data from CPOMS? So that is the case.
So the integration, so the integration we take the data from you guys. You, as part of the API process in the back end, they do need to obviously understand the categories that are in your system, and they do need to be able to pull and speak to kind of UPN, MISID or ULN numbers in your system. But no data in your CPOMS system will be going out into youHQ. It's simply, we are just absorbing the youHQ goodness into our system to try and evolve that communication going on around that young person.
I'm going to be using that. Sam, I'm going to use the term CPOMS absorbs the youHQ goodness at the exhibition I'm at tomorrow. That's a really good one. Sam, thank you so much. If anyone wants to get in touch with you or find out a bit more about the work you're doing, CPOMS, where's the best place for them to go? Yeah,
head to the website. There's we've got some communication stuff in there, some contact us setups. And if there's any particular products discussions and anything going on there, see us at events, catch us there, or if you make contacts through the website and just direct anything towards me, and I'll happily get back in touch. LinkedIn, Twitter, all the good stuff. Any which way.
It's all scrolling along the bottom of the screen. And I think the other thing that's really been really interesting, and I was surprised with Sam as well, that it's been really cool hearing your story from DSL teacher working in 10 schools to a product manager. There are teachers out there. I was one as well. That's we've gone on these interesting journeys that we didn't necessarily plan, but teachers out there, you have got transferable skills. And what I really liked hearing you say was the experience that you have of working in schools and talking to key stakeholders is vital, and that can be taken away and be put in different settings, which you've done amazingly well. So well done to you, Sam. Well done to CPOMS for the amazing success. Thanks again for your time, and hopefully see you soon.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Jez. Thank you. Take care.
Cheers, Sam. Take care.
See you later.